Back at Tidmouth Sheds, Sir Topham Hatt was talking to Thomas. Thomas, you are to find all the lost and hidden tracks around the town. Thomas was pleased. And because you discovered Great Waterton, Sir Topham Hatt added, I am also giving you the most important job of all. You are to be in charge of all the work. Fizzling fireboxes, puffed Thomas proudly. I'm bringing an engine from the mainland to do your usual jobs, Sir Topham Hatt added. Thomas didn't take any notice of this. He was too busy thinking about being in charge of all the work at Great Waterton. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt arrived at Brendam Docks to meet the new engine. Even Cranky was excited. Suddenly there was a loud sound of pistons pumping. From behind a cloud of steam, a new tank engine puffed slowly out. He was shinier and bigger and stronger than Thomas. This is Stanley, boomed Sir Topham Hatt. Welcome to Sawdor, Stanley. Oh my, gasped Henry. Whatever will Thomas say? Thomas puffed proudly along to his new engine shed. James huffed up. Look at my new shed, Thomas tooted grandly. While I'm in charge, I won't have time to puff back to Tidmouth. But James wasn't interested in Thomas's shed. I've just met the new engine, snorted James. He's called Stanley. He's very friendly. Everyone likes him. He's doing your jobs very well. Thomas was surprised. Suddenly, his new shed didn't seem so important. The next day, Thomas had to pull heavy freight cars of stone to the docks. He stopped at the washdown. He saw a shiny new tank engine. That must be Stanley, he puffed to himself. Stanley and Percy were playing and joking. Both engines had told the workmen to pour on more bubbles. Percy was giggling and Stanley was laughing even louder. Thomas felt left out. He tooted to his friend, but Percy was too busy having fun. He didn't notice Thomas. Thomas puffed on. He was upset. Thomas stopped at a junction. Gordon was waiting. Suddenly, with a whoosh and a whistle, Stanley raced onto the main line with Annie and Clancy. They were having a wonderful time. They clattered straight past Thomas. Stanley knows how to have fun, Gordon declared. Thomas watched Stanley disappear. He didn't think it was fun at all. That night, Thomas puffed into Tidmouth Sheds. He was very tired. Tonight, he wanted to be with his friends. Cinders and ashes, he gasped. Stanley was in his berth. Stanley blew a high sound from his whistle. Then Gordon blew a low sound. And Emily trembled a sound no one had ever heard before. All the engines whooshed and whished with laughter. Hello, you must be Thomas, whistled Stanley. Hello, Thomas, chuckled the other engines. But Thomas wasn't chuckling. He didn't like Stanley doing his jobs, or pulling his passenger cars, or being everyone's best friend. But laughing in his berth at Tidmouth Sheds was worst of all. I have to get back to Great Waterton, he huffed. I have work to do. And he chuffed quickly away. Thomas wished Stanley had never come to Sawdor. The next day, Thomas was extra busy. He wanted everyone to see he was better than Stanley. Thomas collected Jack. I need you all to work harder than you've ever worked, he tooted to Jack. Don't worry, Thomas. Alfie, Ned, and Oliver are the best, and Monty and Max are dumping such heavy loads they're getting dizzy. Thomas smiled. He liked being in charge. Thomas wanted to show everyone he could do everything. Next, he was pulling some heavy freight cars. Thomas was puffing too fast round the bend. Toppled off the track. His boat crashed down the bank. Oh no, cried Thomas. Luckily, no one was hurt. So Topham Hatt arrived with Edward. He was cross. Thomas, you must go to the repair yard. Thomas didn't want to go to the repair yard. He wanted to stay in charge. Stanley will take your place in charge of the work at Great Waterton, added Sir Topham Hatt. This was the worst news ever for Thomas. He was so upset. Slowly, Edward puffed away from Great Waterton. Edward had to stop at a signal. Stanley chuffed cheerfully towards them. Bad luck, Thomas, he whistled, and he puffed away. In the distance, they could hear the other engines cheer. Welcome, Stanley! Thomas was cross. I found Great Waterton, he hooted. I'll be back. I'll be in charge again. Then everyone will see I'm more useful than Stanley. Edward's signal changed to go, and he puffed on. Soon, Thomas was as good as new. Now I can get back to my job at Great Waterton, he tooted. Thomas couldn't wait. He chuffed cheerily out of the repair yard. Thomas was very happy to see his friend Percy. Hello, Percy, he tooted. I thought Toby was to pick up workmen. Very smooth run. Hello, Thomas. Stanley has given me extra jobs because he says I give very smooth rides, peeped Percy proudly. Tomorrow, Stanley and I are going to work together on the tower. Thomas didn't want to hear about Stanley. He was upset. Next, Thomas found Jack, Monty and Max. They were very busy. Come on, Monty and Max. Let's make Stanley proud, Jack cried. He's asked us to fill in 3 holes, and we've only filled in 1. Hello, tooted Thomas. But Jack, Monty and Max were too busy to notice him. Thomas was even more upset. He felt as if he didn't matter at all. He puffed sadly away. But Thomas forgot all about feeling sad when he chuffed into Great Waterton Station. It was starting to look as it must have done long ago. Bubbling boilers, he cried. This is very exciting. Then Thomas saw Stanley. He was with Sir Topham Hatt. Sir Topham Hatt saw Thomas. Come here, he boomed. Hello, Thomas, steamed Stanley. Thomas tooted back, but very quietly. Stanley has done a good job. Work is moving fast, Sir Topham Hatt declared. So I have decided, he added, that Stanley will stay in charge and you will help him. Thomas's funnel flattened. Stanley was to stay in charge? Thomas had lost the most important job of all, the job he wanted more than anything else. That afternoon, Stanley asked Thomas to shunt some freight cars. You're the best shunter ever, Thomas. Stanley chuffed cheerily. I will be back for the freight cars very soon. Thomas was very good at shunting freight cars. And he also really liked shunting freight cars. But he didn't really like Stanley telling him what to do. Thomas chuffed unhappily to the freight cars. He wanted things back the way they were, before Stanley had arrived on the island. Thomas shunted lots of freight cars. Stanley had to take them up the steep hill out of the town to the wharf. Suddenly, an idea flew into Thomas's funnel. If I shunt an extra long line of freight cars, Stanley will never be able to pull them, he puffed to himself. Everyone will see he's not so strong after all. Soon, the cars were ready. They were very, very heavy. Stanley chuffed back. My, that's a long train, he puffed. Not for a strong engine like you, tooted Thomas. But Thomas knew it was too long and too heavy. Stanley started up the hill. It was very steep. Stanley was doing his best. Stanley was using all his huff and all his puff. The trucks clanked, creaked. The train was far too heavy. Stanley's wheels spun and slid. Suddenly, the coupling snapped, and Stanley's trucks rolled away, faster and faster. The engines gasped as Stanley's train came racing down the hill. It smashed into the town. As the town crashed to the ground, bricks and dust exploded everywhere. All the hard work was wasted. The engines gasped in horror. And Thomas felt worst of all. He knew it was all his fault. Sir Topham Hatt and Miss Jenny came to see what had happened. "This is a disaster," boomed Sir Topham Hatt. "Thomas," he asked, "why did you shunt so many freight cars for Stanley?" Thomas felt terrible. He knew why he had done it, but he couldn't tell Sir Topham Hatt and the other ancients. He felt too ashamed, so he said nothing. Sir Topham Hatt was very cross. The other ancients started to whisper. "Thomas doesn't like Stanley," snorted James. "That's why he shunted too many freight cars for him." "Why would Thomas do such a thing?" asked Toby. "Thomas would never do that," peeped Percy, but he was worried. Thomas felt very bad. He puffed slowly away. Thomas found an old track. He wanted to be alone. "The other engines don't want me around," he puffed sadly. "They wish I wasn't here at all." Stanley puffed towards Thomas. He saw that Thomas looked sad and alone. "Thomas feels bad," he chuffed to himself. He felt very sorry for him.